Hello, regards from London, from the Darmitian parish of the Russian Church abroad, from our cathedral here. And this is a continuation of the lecture 7 on the Russian Orthodox Church and non-Orthodox Christians. I was telling you last time in the first part of this lecture that mostly the Russian Church abroad had relations with Anglicans, because Anglicans, they really needed support from the Eastern Orthodox Church. Therefore, when Russians found themselves abroad in England, because many of them were taken by the British troops that retreated from the Archangel region of the Russian north. So they were refugees, or often penniless, didn't have any money, and the Anglican Church provided for them a place to worship. And also, since the British Empire was an ally of the Russian Empire, the British troops they engaged in the Civil War, supporting white movement. So it was natural that during even the Civil War, the Russian Church would appeal to the Brits, to the Anglicans, asking them to intercede on behalf of the persecuted Russian Church. And the Anglicans were interested in Metropolitan Anthony Khrapovitsky because before the revolution he engaged in correspondence with Robert Gardner, who was an American Episcopalian occupied with an idea to set up what is nowadays became a World Council of Churches. It was called a World Christian Conference. And when Metropolitan Anthony was initially, he was an Archbishop of Kharkov. Right, he was an Archbishop of Kharkov. And initially, when he was invited, and this correspondence is partially was published by Montreal, St. Job of Pachayev Press, and maybe in Orthodox Life. Probably it's available on Patrick Barnes' website, Orthodox Info, I think is the name, the responses of Metropolitan Anthony. But it's interesting that Metropolitan Anthony was quite enthusiastic about participating in World Council of Churches of that time. His idea was we should come there and witness about Orthodoxy without any sanitizations, without any corrections, without sanitizing anything, just basically we should speak with love but firmly about what the Orthodox Church believes. So this was the last exchange before the revolution. But Metropolitan Anthony presented only one trend in the Russian ecclesiology that basically would be St. Cyprian's trend, that he believes that outside of the Orthodox Church no grace was present. There was not any salvific grace outside of the canonical Orthodox Church. But then at the same time, to correspond this rigid ecclesiology with the modes of the reception, because Orthodox Church does receive people differently. How would you explain then those differences? How would you explain that not everybody is received through baptism? So he would say that it's up to church basically which mode to use, as long as form was preserved properly. This form can be filled with grace at the moment of the reception. This theory received the name theory of sacramental economy. And this theory was very appealing to Anglicans, because it was for them a chance to preserve their faith. I mean, basically to say that we don't need to be reordained, as Roman Catholics would say. At the same time, also would make them acceptable to the strict Orthodox ecclesiology. Therefore, Metropolitan Anthony was very attractive. Also, he was very reputable hierarch, well known in the Orthodox East. So, Metropolitan Anthony engaged in very a quite active correspondence with John Douglas. And John Douglas, he was a canon from Canterbury in charge of the relations with the Orthodox. He grew up in the East. He knew Greek, and also he knew Orthodox Church. He knew a lot about politics, inner politics, elite dynamics, intrigues. So basically, he was quite at home at the Byzantine component of the Orthodox Church, not necessarily as the components that we should be proud of. And this John Douglas became a friend of the Russian Church Abroad, to the point that Russian Church Abroad journal in Serbia was published with the money that were contributed by the Anglicans. And also St. Vladimir's Institute in Harbin also was set up with donations of Anglicans. And another baby of Metropolitan Anthony, St. Serge Theological Institute in Paris, also was founded with money from Anglicans and Episcopalians. So that's important, right? And in 1925, Metropolitan Anthony came here to England to participate in the anniversary of the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea. He participated in procession. You can read about all that in my article, where I studied his relations with Anglicans. And also he contradicted to himself, because how come that when he visited Anglican seminarians, he would say, "You are future laborers for Christ and ministers of Christ, future ministers of Christ," and this to the effect of this. So if they were graceless, outside of the church, schismatics or heretics, how would you call them? So there were some contradictions, and I think those contradictions are good, because they demonstrate that he was in fact very broad, and his personal broadness, personal love for a person, something that he inherited from his hero Dostoevsky, who became a pan-humanist toward the end of their life, who was eager to hug a person, just to give somebody a hug, even if the person was a socialist, a revolutionary, just in order basically to demonstrate his compassion for every suffering human being, regardless how this particular human being identified himself or herself. So, and that was Metropolitan Anthony's, something that he inherited actually. And after that, it was pinnacle, 25, it was pinnacle of the relationship between the Russian Church Abroad and Anglicans, since Anglicans wanted the Russians to start accepting their clergy without reordination, to demonstrate to the Roman Catholics that in fact their priesthood is valid. But actually it never was done. In 1926 a schism happened in the Russian diaspora. Anglicans since now on had to deal with two Russian churches, and basically they chose the church in Paris that was more kind of open toward further dialogue with them. And also this situation somehow made Russian Church Abroad less interested in relations with Anglicans, and relations with Anglicans were important because of the property that Russian Church Abroad was looking after, and this property was property of the entire Russian Church that to big extent our church preserved until the reconciliation. It was property of the mission in Palestine, and Palestine was under the British mandate, as the British government was looking after another train arrived. So there is a train station in Gunnersbury, and we are in the part of London that is called Chiswick. It's underground or overground train, and so the British look after this former Turkish property, Ottoman property. Ottoman territories in Palestine and nowadays Israel. and Archbishop Anastasi was posted there from the ROCOR Synod. So he was an Anglophile, as I mentioned, had good relations with Anglicans, but also he was very diplomatic. He didn't want to receive Anglicans himself. So those nuns that founded the convent in Gethsemane were sent to Syria, to Damascus, to be received by the Antiochian Patriarchate, because he didn't want to sour relationship with the Anglicans. But those relations were soured by the fact that an Anglican priest, Edgar Moore, was received by reordination, and Edgar Moore became a well-known Father Lazarus, who did the translation for the first Jordanville prayer book that is still valid by many of you. And the fact that he was reordained basically put a full stop to the relations with between Russian Church abroad and Anglicans. Also, it happened in 1938. In 2 years' time, Germans took over Serbia, and most of the Central Europe was under the Nazis. So England was quite isolated in Europe. Some minority of countries, very few countries remained unoccupied by the Nazis and their allies. And I understand that relations were quite good, to the point that when in around 1949, when this church, Russian Church abroad, that is called the Church in Exile here, maybe until nowadays officially it's called the Church in Exile, sort of by statute. So when a bishop was ordained for this church, and it was no less than future Metropolitan Vitaly, an Anglican representative of the Anglican Archbishop, were at ordination, fully vested. So it's kind of shocking for many to see those pictures nowadays, but that was reality. It was kind of part of the relationship. Same things happened in Australia, that Anglicans would participate in Orthodox processions, but then also there always were people in the Russian Church abroad who would argue against necessity and to put end to this practice. In 1950, there were guidelines adopted that you can read on this website on how to behave properly, being a clergyman of the Russian Church abroad. Okay, so that's speaking of Anglicans, and next time I will be talking about World Council of Churches, because I see that my battery is basically dying here. Okay, so I will talk to you next time from elsewhere. Thank you, bye bye.